Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. This video is going to be part 2 of converting a hand plane into a scraper. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll put a card up in the corner. You can check that out. If we consult our chicken scratch drawing here, in this video we're going to make all of the parts that hold and clamp the blade in place. So to get started, I've got this piece, just a little bit of milling to square it up and filing to round over the top there. This is going to be the backer plate of the blade. And I'm just going to start by holding it in there approximately in its location and marking where I want this piece to go on here, somewhere in that area. And this is going to be the connection point between the backer of the blade and our adjuster here, which will adjust the tilt angle of the blade. So I'm going to get started on that, and then we'll weld that on there. first thing I did after welding this on was to come back and fly cut this surface. I wasn't sure how much this thing had warped or twisted while welding it up, and I wanted this to be nice and flat for the blade to sit against. After that, came back and started drilling and tapping some of these holes. These are all referenced off of the bottom surface here and off of the blade surface for all the dimensions. Everybody always wants to see mess ups on camera, but you also have to decide how much you're going to film, otherwise these videos turn into hours and hours long. So this was the second hole I did, and I figured I didn't need to record all of the center drilling. Well, that's the one I snapped the center drill off in. No big deal, I just moved down 100 thousandths and found a new center drill, drilled and tapped. And since it was the first hole of the higher dimension there, I just copied and did the same dimensions on the opposite side. These four are all tapped 632. Turned up a little pin, and this is going to hold this part in place. So on final assembly, you can see there's a head on that side and it sticks out a little bit over here. On final assembly, I'll peen this side over to lock it in place. So next up, I need to find the hole location for our holes, our pivot holes down here in the side of the scraper. So I'm gonna head over to the lathe and get this set up, and then I'll bring you back and show you the setup. For this setup, I've got an angle plate over here bolted down to the table. This has been squared up to the mill, and just a scrap of aluminum in the vise. We're gonna set the scraper down here up against the aluminum and slide it over until it hits the angle plate. Then I'm just going to use a couple of C-clamps to clamp it in place up against the aluminum. I'm already in the X position that I want to drill this hole, so then I'll just use an edge finder, pick up the bottom surface, and move up my dimension to drill the hole. Then I can take the thing off, move it to the back, and do exactly the same. Slide it over till it hits the angle plate, pick up this surface, and move up for my hole location. That should give us two holes exactly across from each other, and that's what we're looking to do. Next up, we need to make the clamp that's actually going to hold the blade in place. I've got a couple of parts started. This is just flat. I hit it with the fly cutter to get the mill scale off of it, and it's the same width as our blade backer. And a couple of little tabs, countersunk for our number 6 screws. And these are going to screw into each side at the upper hole location. And I'm going to use a couple of scraps of 1/8 inch aluminum. This is just going to be a spacer to leave room for where the blade will be. So it'll leave a gap for the blade coming through the middle there. Off camera, I'm going to tack each of these, and then I'll pull it apart, take the screws out, and weld all the way around them. And then I'll meet you over at the mill when we're putting some of the shape into this clamp portion. I'll do some more sanding and smoothing of these after I finish shaping the rest of it. This is kind of an ugly setup, but what we're going to do is take a bunch of material out of the middle of here, and I didn't want to clamp it just on this one side and then take all the material out of the middle. So these scraps of 3/8 will let me hold it on both sides and not put any pressure on the tabs. I'm already centered up on the workpiece, and I've got an 1 3/8" diameter insert tool in here. That looked like it was about the right diameter to leave behind what I want on each side. So I'm just going to use that to take all the material out of the middle. We're going to use a threading die and thread this 1/4 20. So we're aiming for a little bit under 250, maybe say 245 to 247. One more pass should do it. I've got a 1/4 20 die in the tailstock die holder. The lathe is in back gears, and we're just going to cut some threads on the end of there. Now we can finally put this thing together and test it out. I did make an extra spacer to go on here, and that's just to create more spring tension. I didn't have a longer spring, and I kind of wanted a longer spring. So this should add a little bit of tension to the spring when it's extended out farther. These screws aren't really tight, just sort of snugged up. I'm not going to go into how to sharpen the blade. There's a bunch of different videos out there. Everybody has their favorite method, and the best thing to do is try a couple different ones and see what works best for you. What this is a piece of high-speed steel, about 30 thousandths thick. And the bottom corner down here has a burr rolled over on the edge. So instead of being square, from the side view, instead of just being square, it intentionally has a burr rolled onto that edge. And that's what does the cutting. So let's move over to the granite surface plate and we'll get the blade installed. I just want to install the blade on the granite surface plate so that I have a nice flat reference underneath here to square the blade up to. The burr should go on the forward edge, the leading edge. Blade will slide right down here. Hold light pressure just to keep it square to the bottom and tighten up this thumb screw. That pinches the blade in 3 points of contact. The thumb screw right here and both of the forward corners. The thumb screw in the back, you just want to tighten until it hits the blade right there. It's barely touching the back of the blade, and then probably not even an eighth of a turn more. Just a little bit to put a very slight bow into the blade. And the point of that is you don't want, from looking at it from the front, like how it's going to approach the wood, you don't want the blade to be square. The goal is to have it bowed ever so slightly, basically just to pick the corners up. This is meant for smoothing, and you don't want the corners of the blade to drag. This is just a scrap of maple. I think you can see the milled surface finish that's in there. Fairly rough. You can feel all of the high spots and low spots over it. So it might take a little while. This is a fairly rough starting point. This thing is not meant for lots of material removal. It's meant for smoothing. So if you have a ton of material to take off, you should be using something else. This thing is going to take maybe a couple thousandths at a time. We put the blade in with the angle here slightly forward of vertical, and so to increase our cut, right now there's no cut at all. We're just going to loosen this screw in the back, this knob in the back, and that will tilt the blade forward which engages that burr on the bottom front corner. Taking the smallest of shavings right now. It's intermittent. It's probably taking off all those high spots that I can feel. But it is working. It's actually making shavings, not just sawdust from scratching over the surface. Yeah, a couple thousandths worth of shavings at a time. And the spring works great for being able to adjust on the fly and not have to mess with a second knob up in front here to tighten it and lock the blade in place. So there's still a little bit of rough spot left right here. But I don't know if you can tell how shiny and smooth the rest of it is. It feels like a piece of glass. Yeah, you can see a little bit of the rough spot left in here. I did a little more off camera, and I'm hoping you can see the reflection of the lapping plate in the surface finish. Leaves an excellent finish. Like I said, it feels like glass. I couldn't be happier with how well this thing works. I hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching.